Only 8 teams remain undefeated after Week 9 of the 2024 college football season, and there's no doubt that they are all hoping to punch their ticket into the first 12-team college football playoff. I've split the remaining undefeated teams into 3 distinct groups, starting with the fun teams. These programs have been pretty lucky to get to this point, and I believe they are still long shots to get into the playoff. Next, we have playoff contenders. These teams have solidified themselves as some of the favorites to get into the 12-team playoff, but I can't see them finding a way to win it all. And lastly, we have the championship contenders. These teams are as close as you can get to locks for the playoff, and I believe they have the talent to make it all the way this year. So without further ado, let's jump into the rankings. Starting off with the fun teams, I have one of the biggest surprises of the year, Army. The Army-Navy storyline was fun, but now that Navy got absolutely pummeled by Notre Dame, Army stands as the only military academy with a perfect record. They have done extremely well this year, destroying every team they've played, with their closest margin of victory being 17 points against Florida Atlantic and East Carolina. I believe the bulk of their success can be attributed to their quarterback, Bryson Daly. He ranks first in FBS in rushing touchdowns with 19, and 10th in rushing yards with 909, which is insane for a quarterback. He has also been a fairly reliable passer. While military academies are famous for running the triple option and almost never throwing, Daly has proven to be a threat, with 7 passing touchdowns and 0 interceptions. Army is coming up on games against Air Force and North Texas, which they will be expected to win. However, the game after that will be against Notre Dame. I think that, like the Navy-Notre Dame game, this will be a good opportunity to see if Army can compete with the best of the best. While I think Army will win the AAC, giving them an outside chance of making the playoff, I still have them firmly ranked as the worst remaining undefeated team. Following Army, I have Pittsburgh. Pitt has been an extremely interesting team to me this year. Their quarterback, Eli Holstein, has been a stud for them despite just being a freshman. But I think they are pretty lucky to be in the position they find themselves. Nothing really jumps off the page. They have a slightly above average offense, a below average pass defense, but they do have a solid run defense. The differentiator is that this team just flat out finds a way to win games. They scraped past Cincinnati 28-27 early in the season, a close scrap 38-34 against West Virginia the week after that, and a recent 2-point win over California. At this point, I thought any game could break their undefeated streak, but they just humiliated Syracuse 41-13 and had Kyle McCord seeing ghosts where he threw 5 interceptions. Pitt's next game is at SMU, and I believe this is where their streak comes to an end. They're currently 7.5-point underdogs and will definitely need some of the magic they've had going this season to keep their Cinderella story alive. And that wraps up the fun teams. While Army and Pitt aren't bad teams by any measure, I just don't think they are at the level of the remaining teams. With that being said, in the 6th spot, I have Iowa State. The Cyclones were expected to be a decent team in the preseason, but they have surpassed those expectations, proving to be a great team. Their defense has been a real bright spot, keeping every team they've played but one to 21 points or less. They've been involved in 2 close scraps against Iowa and UCF, but besides that, it has been relatively smooth sailing for them. I'm not sure if this team is truly a contender, but the coming weeks will shed some light on the caliber of this team with some tough Big 12 games coming up. But for now, they are in a great spot to get into the Big 12 championship and potentially the college football playoff. Next, and perhaps the biggest surprise on this list, is the Indiana Hoosiers. I'm not gonna lie, I'm a pretty delusional Indiana fan, but even I would never have expected a turnaround quite like this. What Cignetti is doing for this team will be studied and attempted to be repeated by programs for years and years to come. The Hoosiers are 8-0, coming off of a win against Washington. Indiana is still yet to trail in any game this season, and has yet to have a close game, with 14 points being the closest any team has gotten. Their quarterback, Curtis Rourke, should be back for their game this weekend at Michigan State, and barring something crazy from happening, Indiana should be undefeated for their matchup at Ohio State. While everything is looking up for Indiana, it should be known that their schedule has been easier than most, not playing a single ranked team up to this point. And while I believe they are a good team, I don't really think they're contenders at this point, but I would not be surprised to see them make the playoff. Up next, I have Miami. This is a team that I am not sold on yet. They have an extremely high-powered offense, and their defense has looked quite solid, but I need to see them do it against an actual opponent. The three best teams they've played have been Virginia Tech, California, and Louisville, which all ended up being one-possession victories for Miami. The rest of their schedule is fairly easy, and I am looking forward to them potentially playing Clemson in the ACC Championship, because I believe this game can tell us if Miami is truly ready to compete come time for the playoff. The differentiator this team has over a team like Indiana is Cam Ward. The dude is now the Heisman favorite for a reason, and he can just flat out throw it. He has played at an extremely high level for 4 complete seasons, and with this being his 5th as a starter, he's one of the most experienced college quarterbacks around. With that being said, I'm still not comfortable putting this team amongst the championship contenders because of how many close calls they've had against unranked opponents. With our last team amongst the playoff contenders, we have BYU. BYU has been another surprise this year, not receiving any AP votes until week 3 and not being ranked until week 5. They were picked to come near the bottom of the Big 12 by a lot of analysts, and when they started winning games, people still wrote them off. But now being ranked 9th in the country, it has just gotten harder and harder to ignore them. A close win over currently ranked SMU, an absolute stomping over Kansas State, and some decent wins over Big 12 competition. They don't have a ranked team on the rest of their schedule and could very easily find themselves in the Big 12 championship. I made this team the last playoff contender because I can see them sliding their way into the playoff, but I don't think they have the talent to compete with any of the high-end Big 10 or SEC teams. In our last group, the championship contenders, we only have 2 teams, starting with Penn State. This team is solid on offense and defense, and I'm a big fan of the fact that they have an established quarterback in Drew Aller, who is in his 3rd year throwing for Penn State. Like most teams on this list, the Nittany Lions benefit from having a weak strength of schedule, ranking 3rd from the bottom in the Big 10. But they have a solid ranked win over Illinois, which proves they can compete against higher-end teams. However, Penn State has had 2 one-possession wins, an overtime thriller against USC, and surprisingly only a 7-point victory at home against Bowling Green of all teams. While this game is cause for some concern, I think it's a good thing they got it out of the way with their record still intact, unlike Notre Dame, who would still be on this list today if they had held it together at home against Northern Illinois. I don't see Penn State winning their game against Ohio State, especially with Drew Aller's injury status still up in the air, but it's definitely a possibility. Besides that game, they don't come across any more ranked Big 10 teams and can get into the playoff even if they lose to Ohio State. And in the top spot, it's probably no surprise that I have the current #1 team in the country, Oregon. ESPN says Oregon's strength of schedule is just 1 higher than Penn State's, but that doesn't make much sense to me. The only reasonable explanation is that their strength of schedule is being weighed down by the very bad teams that they have played. 3 of their wins come from teams ranked in the bottom 5 of the Big 10 according to ESPN's FPI ranking, and 2 more wins come from FCS team Idaho and Oregon State, who ranks 82nd in FPI. However, they find their place at the top of this list and the AP poll due to their other 3 wins, all ranked against Boise State, Ohio State, and Illinois. Ohio State is clearly the best win of the 3, and definitely proved that Oregon is a team that can compete with anyone in the nation. Oregon is another team with a veteran quarterback, this time in Dylan Gabriel. This is currently his 6th season, and he is without a doubt the most experienced quarterback in college football, currently leading the race for the Heisman. Oregon is as close as you can get to a shoe-in for the playoff, and I expect them to make it the furthest out of all the teams on this list. That about wraps up my ranking for the remaining undefeated teams in college football. Let me know how you guys have these teams ranked and which teams you can see making a run in the college football playoff. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.